Hi again. In Armageddon Now, we've reached the last chapter. Jerusalem, what now? And this is in the wake of the Six-Day War of 1967. And there were a lot of evangelicals excited about what was going on, specifically the recapturing of Jerusalem and Israel being in full control of it for the first time. But there were also a lot of misgivings, and Wilson's going to continue to tell us about that. He says in 1970, a leading evangelical publisher, William B. Erdmans, published a major criticism of the Israeli position and of the premillenarian attitude. Whose Land is Palestine? By Frank H. Epp. It was probably not widely influential among premillenarians, but those who cared to pursue the question found trenchant passages like this. Quote, Christians should remind themselves that the various prophetic schemes that have had credence within the Christian community all arose in specific political contexts in which Christ and Antichrist were related to the political powers of the day struggling against each other. The schemes change with the changing of the powers. At the moment, many Christians see Christ allied with America and the Antichrist with Russia and the Arabs. End of quote from Epp. The book had telling arguments, but as a whole it was not likely to find acceptance among premillenarians because it rejected the foundations of a literalist interpretation. Epp universalized the promises of the Holy Land and interpreted the Nile to the Euphrates borders as only symbolic. Charles C. Ryrie, professor of systematic theology, dean of doctoral studies at Dallas Theological Seminary, made a more effective type of presentation in Christianity Today. Speaking of premillennialists, he noted that they thought the Six-Day War to be another step toward eventual occupation by Israel of the territory from the Euphrates to the river of Egypt. He said, every such gain is generally viewed with rejoicing, for the furthering of God's purpose for Israel seems to indicate that the coming of the Lord draws near. End of quote. Reminding his readers that no side was entirely blameless, he went on to say, quote, and while the efforts of a political state may ultimately be used by God in the mysterious accomplishing of his purpose, his use of the wrath of men does not excuse that wrath or make right the wrongs that the state may commit. In other words, we must not assume that the end justifies the means. End of quote from Ryrie. Using the analogy of the crucifixion, he remarked that those who crucified Christ were not without blame just because they were doing the will of God. Likewise, he said, the state of Israel is not relieved of its obligation to act responsibly in the community of nations, even though the secret purpose of God may be brought to fruition through its actions. Any premillennialist rejoicing over the apparent nearness of the Lord's return will have to be coupled with sadness over current events. End of quote. Even the Evangel magazine voiced a similar position. Ralph W. Harris indicated that even though the outcome of the Arab-Israeli conflict was predestined, that did not mean one side was entirely right or wrong. The scripture merely indicated the final outcome. The conquest of Jerusalem brought a flourish of speculation about the rebuilding of the temple. The Evangel's initial comment upon the war included an observation of Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Dayan. Quote, if I may say so, we felt we were fighting to prevent the fall of the Third Temple. End of quote. An article a month later quoted a Florida rabbi's statement that, quote, the time has come when the temple should be restored in fulfillment of the promise Jews have made in their prayers for centuries. Bring us back to our land, and we will rebuild thy house. Various paperback books since the Six-Day War have referred to the rebuilding of the temple. Wilbur M. Smith's Israeli-Arab Conflict and the Bible included a discussion of the temple that was to be built in Jerusalem and pointed out that it was not to be built where the Muslim Dome of the Rock stood. Wait a minute. And pointed out that it was to be built where the Muslim Dome of the Rock stood. Arnold T. Olson in Inside Jerusalem, City of Destiny was more dogmatic. He said, quote, "The temple will be rebuilt. Israel has the will, access to the means, and now the site. What remains is the problem of how to occupy that site without bringing on themselves the wrath of the Arabs, stirred up to what would be to them a real holy war. But build she will," Olson said. The most influential of these paperbacks was Al Lindsey's national bestseller, The Late Great Planet Earth, which has reportedly sold 5 million copies. That was just in the mid-70s. I think it ultimately sold 25 or 30 million. Lindsey also took a strong line on the temple. Quote, "Obstacle or no obstacle, it is certain that the temple will be rebuilt. Prophecy demands it." End of quote. But he went even further and predicted, if this is the time this writer believes it is, they will soon begin the construction of this temple. He recounted that in an interview just after the war, the Israeli historian Israel Eldad had said, "From the time that King David first conquered Jerusalem until Solomon built the temple, just one generation passed. So it will be with us." When asked about the Dome of the Rock, Eldad responded, "Who knows, maybe there will be an earthquake." Lindsey had also used this interview with Eldad for his article in Moody Monthly's special issue on Israel, just after the war. In "The Pieces Fall Together," that's the title of the article, he said that for centuries it appeared that the Jews had no chance of returning to the Holy Land. But within 20 years the state had developed, and in recent months Jerusalem had been repossessed. "We only await the rebuilding of the temple, and this piece of the puzzle will be complete." This feeling was not unique. John F. Walvoord also observed in this same issue that many were predicting an early erection of the temple. In a news section headed "Israel Things to Come," Christianity Today reported on an advertisement in the Washington Post asserting that a project to rebuild the temple had begun and inviting inquiries from those who were willing to help. Christianity Today also cited a London periodical, The Christian and Christianity Today. That's an awkward title. I've never heard of it before. The Christian and Christianity Today, which reported that to build the temple, the Israeli government had ordered 60,000 tons of stone from Bedford, Indiana, and that it was being handled by Pier 26 in New York. The cornerstones were supposedly already in Israel. Such information was never verified. Eternity magazine carried an article, "Time for the Temple," by Raymond L. Cox, which recounted that Jewish soldiers had placed a sign at the newly captured Wailing Wall proclaiming, "This is a temple." Cox noted that some Jewish religious leaders said that nothing could be done about rebuilding the temple until the Messiah came, but that others, such as Menachem Begin, leader of Israel's Freedom Party, had announced the third temple, outlined by Ezekiel, will assuredly be rebuilt in our own generation. This was all offered as evidence of the direction of Israeli thinking. Although Israeli officials had promised that Muslim holy places would not be disturbed, Cox observed that not even the government of Israel can forever restrain the fulfillment of prophecy. A later article in Eternity, however, pointed out that the Israelis had been misunderstood, that the sign at the Wailing Wall, Beit Knesset, should have been translated, "This is a synagogue." To assume that the building of the temple was next on the agenda was unwarranted. J. Dwight Pentecost in 1971 reported in Moody Monthly that on his trip to the Middle East he could uncover no plans for the rebuilding of the temple, much to the consternation of his premillenarian inquirers. The point he was making was that it was not necessary for the rebuilding to precede the rapture of the church. A new twist was offered by Malcolm Couch in a 1973 article in Moody Monthly entitled, "When Will the Jews Rebuild Their Temple?" Couch was the producer of The Temple, a film based upon the book Satan in the Sanctuary by Thomas S. McCall and Zola Levitt. According to the article, recent archaeological excavations filmed by Couch have proved that the Holy of Holies, the inner sanctum of the temple, was located 50 yards or more east of the Dome of the Rock. The temple could be rebuilt without destroying the mosque. Couch said, "What I saw and heard there, plus our research of past months, convinces me that within the next 10 years, Israel could move to rebuild the temple. All of this fascination with the temple assumed the permanency and legitimacy of the Israeli control of Jerusalem. The justice of the conquest was not even given a second thought." I'll put in a link to a video we did on Revelation 11, where you seem to have the scenario where the beast defeats the two witnesses in what appears to be Jerusalem. But the mystery is that the city is not even named there, so that causes conservative Christians to speculate as to, is this Rome? Is this Jerusalem? Where is it? Where this confrontation between the beast and the prophets occurs. And why is the name suppressed here if it is indeed Jerusalem? And that's a very good question. We've done videos on it in the Babylon the Great playlist. You might want to check that out. This one I think is number 3 in that playlist, because we made the point that both the names of Rome and Jerusalem are missing from the text of Revelation, except of course in the New Jerusalem at the very end, coming down out of heaven. Why are the most important cities in the world to Christians of the first century not even mentioned in the text of the book of Revelation? So I'll put that video on your screen. Next time, more on the speculation about the Second Temple in the place of the Arabs and their mosque, the Dome on the Rock. See you soon.